Well, it's been a very hot summer, making it a challenge to stay cool, but this is especially true for our senior population. We're joined today by Dr. Mila Luchak, who's a medical officer of health with the South Zone of Alberta Health Services. Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. Luchak. So great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Now, of course, one of the challenges our seniors are facing is heat stroke or heat exhaustion. Can you first of all share with us what the symptoms of heat stroke are? What would a person, how would somebody know that they could possibly be in trouble?
Heat stroke is one of the more severe forms of heat-related illness. Heat-related illness has a number of symptoms that people should watch for, and it may range from having a heat rash to heat cramps in the muscles, or even swollen hands and feet. But that could progress to something called heat exhaustion or heat stroke. And heat exhaustion would be where someone may be sweating profusely, they may have some nausea or vomiting. But when it gets to something as far as heat stroke, that would be a medical emergency.
Wow.
And that would be when someone has a core body temperature of at least 40 degrees Celsius higher, and they may have confusion, they may have altered level of consciousness, they may report feeling quite faint as well. So those are some symptoms to watch out for in other individuals and make sure that, is this something that's related to heat, and is it actually heat stroke?
Yeah, definitely. So if you notice these symptoms in someone, what's the appropriate treatment?
If you're really concerned about someone and you think that they may have heat stroke, it's really important to make sure that you call for medical attention as soon as possible. And while waiting for medical attention, it's important to make sure that that person is removed from that hot environment, whether it's going inside or finding some sort of shade somewhere. Can also try to find a wet or damp towel that you can place around the individual and remove any sort of tight clothing that may be constricting them. And trying to also offer water if they're actually able to be drinking water at that point. So it's really important to make sure that you really understand what those signs and symptoms are of heat stroke and then what to do.
Now, of course, we know that seniors and also youngsters are at a higher risk, but we're also told that there are other factors that could increase the risk as well, like obesity and heart disease or even some medications.
Absolutely. There are a number of chronic medical conditions that can make heat related illness worse. And so that could pertain to diabetes, obesity, even various chronic mental health conditions as well. And when we talk about seniors, there are actually some changes in the body that do sort of increase that risk of heat related illness. And that relates to a decreased sense of thirst, for example. So individuals may not know that they're thirsty and drinking adequate amounts of water. They also have the decreased ability to sweat, which is really one important way of trying to get rid of all of that heat. And then also the medications that seniors may be on also could make heat-related illness symptoms worse. And a lot of that has to do with some of those chronic medical conditions, as well as some of the reasons why we can't really get rid of the heat and trying to sweat and make sure that we're actually regulating our temperature in the body. Lastly, I would mention that it's really important to make sure that another risk factor would be that seniors may be alone. They may not have somebody at home with them. So it's really important to check on them as well.
Yeah, it definitely, absolutely. Now, you, of course, mentioned fluids a number of times in there, water and stuff. So let's talk preventative measures. We're, of course, supposed to drink lots of fluids, but apparently there are some fluids that aren't necessarily that helpful. What are they?
That's right. So water is preferable, but I would suggest that fluids containing caffeine as well as alcohol would not be preferable because it can actually lead to more dehydration.
Yeah, so maybe not a good idea to sit out on the deck and have that glass of wine or glass of beer, even though it sounds like a great idea in the hot sun, but it can actually make the situation worse a little bit, can't it?
That's right. Yeah. So just being cognizant, water is really the best thing to stay hydrated with.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you, of course, had mentioned checking in on our seniors. So how important is it to do that? I mean, a lot of them do live alone. How often should they be checked in on, and who should be doing that if they don't have family members around them?
That's a really good point. And so it's really important to do frequent visits for seniors in the community. So it may be a relative, but as you mentioned, maybe there are individuals that don't have relatives close by. So if you know of a neighbor who's elderly, or over the age of 65 and they have many conditions, and you just want to check in on them, I think it's important to check on them even daily during these times when our temperatures are so high on a daily. And right now, it seems like even on a weekly basis, we have really high elevated temperatures. So checking whether it's in person or even just having a phone call, if that's all that you're able to manage at this point, just to check on that individual and make sure that they're doing okay.
Yeah, or so maybe like a neighbor possibly. If you know that you have an elderly neighbor, just be vigilant about that and cognizant. Yeah.
Exactly. It's important to look out for each other.
Yeah. Okay. So if you are outside during a hot spell, how much of a difference is it to wear lighter clothing, or even like what lighter colored or ventilated clothing, like hats that are ventilated? Can that help a little bit?
Yeah, all of those things are very helpful. So making sure, as you mentioned, wearing lighter colored clothing, more loose fitting. Also regarding hats, make sure that it has a nice broad brim on it, which really tries to eliminate the sun from shining on the face and on the back. Also, I might add to the wardrobe, making sure that the eye protection is there as well from the sun. So part of it is keeping an individual cool, but also making sure that there's that protection from the sun that can also really add to that heat related illness.
Now, of course, if you're inside, putting on the air conditioning is great, but a lot of people don't have AC. So, what are some other things that they can do in their house to keep cool?
Absolutely. So it's great to have AC, but not everybody has access to AC. And so in the house, it's really important a few things that you could do. So trying to draw the shades or blinds and making sure that you're reducing sun from entering the home during the day. Also, the use of fans are also quite helpful. At nighttime, it's also useful to open up the windows and have a couple of windows in the house that creates more of a cross breeze. So that would be more useful at nighttime when those temperatures are a little bit lower. And then also just thinking about maybe not turning on the oven or the stove for long periods of time during the day, just to make sure that you minimize the heat in the house.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Now, some people say that it could be helpful for elderly people to maybe take a cold bath for a period of time to cool down that body temperature. Is this something that could help?
So that's one strategy that could be useful for seniors, providing that it's safe for them to take a cold bath or a cold shower. Another way could be to use a cold towel or a damp cloth that they could use as well, just to put on their skin. Just another mechanism of reducing that heat. Another thing, if there's really no strategies at home and they don't have AC, it may also be a good idea to go to an environment where there is AC, whether it's a shopping mall or a community center or a public place where they can take a little bit of a break or reprieve from the heat during the day. That's just another strategy.
Yeah, definitely. Now, we've been talking a lot about seniors, but we can also turn our attention to youngsters, toddlers. So too often we hear these tragic, horrible stories of a toddler being left alone in a hot car. When the temperature is 25 degrees outside, it doesn't take long for that temperature to get so much even hotter than that inside the vehicle. Sometimes it can get twice that hot, doesn't it?
Yes, it's really important to make sure that pets, as well as young children, and really anybody, should not be left in a hot vehicle for any periods of time, just because of that ability for the temperature to significantly increase in a short period of time, especially during these warm days.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what about sunburn issues? This is also a risk for everybody, all age groups. So when it comes to sunscreen, is there really much of a difference between SPF 30 and SPF 50, or is this just a marketing thing?
In terms of sunscreen, it's important to make sure that it has at least SPF 30 in it. But what's also important is that it covers the spectrum of UVA and UVB, and that also people pay attention to apply sunscreen. So, reading the label about how often to apply it. For example, if you're going to go swimming or if you're sweating quite a bit on that day, making sure that you reapply quite often. And that would be really important in terms of sun protection. And also, even in addition to the sunscreen, making sure that you eliminate being outside in those peak hours when the sunlight is strongest. So that's usually between 10 a.m. and about 4 p.m. So maybe, rescheduling activities indoors during that period of time. And also, like we talked about the clothing, so wide brimmed hat, wearing eye protection as well, and the clothing as well, just to protect from the sun.
Mm-hmm. How much of a risk is there of developing skin cancers with too much sun exposure? Is there a significant risk for lighter skinned people, or is that a fallacy?
So, really, every individual is at risk for developing skin cancer with prolonged sun exposure. Sun exposure just is a major risk factor for developing some of these types of skin cancers. And there are some people that are more at risk. But I would say that it's really important for everybody to think about sun protection, because we all do have that as a risk factor in our life, especially with the sunlight and heat these days.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a real hot one this year, hasn't it been?
Absolutely. Yes, it has been.
Thank you so much for your time and expertise today, Dr. Luchak. We really appreciate having you on.
Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Dr. Mila Luchak is a medical officer of health with the South Zone of Alberta Health Services. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.